On social media, she made it seem like she was the last person you would expect to face charges in connection to an alleged case of child abuse. A caring mom in charge of a loving home for her children. But now she and her boyfriend are facing some serious charges after her son may lose his life in the hospital after allegedly being beaten. But even though the mom was not allegedly home at the time her boyfriend beat her son, putting him in the ICU, why she is facing a felony charge. We're on the case presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. This is a story that's been gaining a lot of attention, especially online over the last couple of days. But law enforcement in Texas have been pretty tight-lipped about information in this case until now. We're finally learning some details from law enforcement about what allegedly happened to a 3-year-old boy. The boy's family has identified him as Dawson Zamora. You can see he has a sweet smile. He is just 3 years old. And it appears that Dawson lived at least part-time with his mom in McKinney, Texas, which is a suburb of Dallas. This is a picture of Dawson's mom. Her name is Chelsea Berg. Social media only tells part of the story too often on this show. Oftentimes you can see it be a flat-out lie of who someone really is. Now, it's unclear if that's the case in this situation because at this point she is only facing allegations. But you can see that she does seem like the perfect mom who's there for her kids. Now, it appears that she and Dawson's dad are reportedly divorced. Recently, she apparently had been dating a man named Christopher Alexander. He's 30 years old. Doesn't seem like he had a lot going on social media, so the only picture I could find of him is this mugshot, and here's why. He has a mugshot in this case, according to police. Court documents obtained by Fox 4 in Dallas show that on October 14th, Alexander took young Dawson to the hospital, allegedly claiming that he had a fall. Alexander told his girlfriend Chelsea he heard a loud, quote, thud. Now, Chelsea reportedly told police that she left the 3-year-old with her boyfriend around 7:20 in the morning that day. Then, shortly after, Alexander sent her a text about Dawson eating lunch. Alexander then called Berg, saying that he was rushing him to the hospital. Documents obtained by that TV station say that when Berg got to the hospital, Alexander, her boyfriend, told the same story, that he was in the other room, he heard a loud thud, and then he rushed the boy to get care. But he didn't share more than that, and that is where things appear to get suspicious. At the hospital, Alexander then reportedly got an attorney, and he stopped talking to police about whatever happened to put the boy in this condition. Now, hospital staff reportedly said that Dawson's injuries, the 3-year-old boy, they are so severe that they could not have been from just a fall like Alexander is claiming. His injuries include bleeding in the brain, bruising in various states of healing over his entire body, wounds to the chest and stomach, and anal trauma. Now, Berg, Dawson's mom, told investigators that her boy did not have those injuries when she left him in the care of her boyfriend in the morning. That is according to those court documents. 2 days after Dawson was rushed to the hospital, and reportedly he is still there right now, and we are keeping an eye on his condition, the man that his mom reportedly left him with, Christopher Alexander, was arrested. He's currently facing charges of injury to a child, as well as stalking and tamper fabricate evidence. Now, he's being held on $210,000 bond. He is still in the county jail at the time of this recording. We'll have more on his criminal record, especially that stalking charge, in just a moment. It is important potentially to how this case could play out. Now, on the same day that Christopher Alexander, the boyfriend, was arrested, Chelsea Berg, Dawson's mom, was also arrested. Now, here's her mugshot. KFDA TV says that she was arrested on a charge of injury to a child by omission. She bonded out of jail the same day as her arrest. Her bond was set at $10,000. Now, we can see in online court records that her attorney filed a motion to change the conditions of her bond. Fox 4 in Texas says that was so she could say, quote, goodbye to her son. That is reportedly according to her attorney. Now, she was reportedly told that young Dawson did not have any brain activity. Her bond conditions originally restricted her from having contact with him. It's unclear specifically why Berg is facing a first-degree felony in connection to what allegedly happened to her son. Her ex-husband, who says he now has custody of both of their kids, told KFDA, when you hear that Dawson had injuries that show prior bruising, that they were all in different states of healing, he believes that means that this was not allegedly the first time that this boy was beaten. Now, as for Christopher Alexander, he was previously convicted of theft and unlawful restraint. And that's not his only run-in with the criminal justice system prior to the situation he's in right now. He reportedly is facing a stalking charge, and that's related to a separate case. Dawson's dad says his ex-wife allegedly knew that Alexander had a, quote, ankle monitor, and that he was facing accusations in a stalking case. So the major question is, if he was someone who, according to the legal system, had issues, was potentially dangerous, why would she leave a 3-year-old in his care? In preparing for this story, I put Christopher Alexander's name into truthfinder.com. Not only did it show me potential phone numbers, emails, past addresses, it also has a section that shows criminal history. And in that section, we saw cases like one where he's accused of stalking and another one of unlawful restraint. At Law&Crime, we partner with Truthfinder, and we use it to get details on the people involved in our stories, just like this one. But even if you don't work in true crime, it can be a great resource to give you some peace of mind, because it's one of the largest public record search services in the US. And with the paid subscription service, you get access to unlimited reports about almost anyone. And right now, you can get 50% off your first month of confidential background reports. Just go to truthfinder.com/OTC. Now, Dawson's dad, Berg's ex-husband, he is going public with his side of the story. He put up a post the day after Berg and Alexander were arrested, and I want to read it for you. It says, quote, "I do want to clear the air and let you guys know what's going on. My ex-wife left my son alone with her now boyfriend. He was then brutally, and I mean brutally, beaten. He was pronounced dead by the time the medical professionals could get to him. No one knows the full amount of time he was deceased, because he was driven to the hospital by his abuser, the boyfriend, after being beaten, and the police were not called. The medical staff was told that he fell off the bed. The medical professionals resuscitated my son for 8 minutes and managed to bring him back to life. He was then airlifted to where he is currently receiving treatment in Dallas, Texas. He is now in a medical-induced coma and on life support. The right side of his brain is unresponsive, and we do not know the full effects of brain damage at this time due to the amount of swelling. He is surrounded by friends and family with so much love and support. My son Dawson is not okay. Our family is not okay. I'm not okay. All I ask is that you keep my son in your thoughts. Pray for justice, pray for healing and comfort over my son. He is loved and he is not alone." Now, at this time, police have not confirmed those statements being made by the family of Dawson Zamora. Also, at the time of this recording, Dawson is reportedly on life support. Now, there is a GoFundMe that's raising money for him to help with his care, and at the time of this recording, it has more than $20,000. Joining me now is former federal prosecutor and president of West Coast Trial Lawyers, Nima Romani. It's always great to have you on Law&Crime. Very, very sad and disturbing case that's still developing right now out of Texas. But I want to begin with the charge that the mom is facing, which is injury to a child by omission. What does that tell you?
Chris, there are always sad cases we cover here on Law&Crime, but whenever we're dealing with an injury or death to a child, that's the absolute worst. So in this particular case, obviously baby Dawson has suffered a serious brain injury, and his mother, Berg, is being charged with a felony by omission. And that's important because usually under the law, especially criminal law, you can't be charged or put in jail or prison for an omission. There has to be an affirmative act. But there is an exception when there is a duty or a special relationship. And that's what we're dealing with here. Obviously, mother-child, parent-child, that parent has a duty to take care of their child. And if there's neglect there, that could be grounds for criminal liability.
And when we talk about neglect in a lot of cases, and I'm sure we've talked about them, you see the body camera video of a home in disarray, or it's a child that has an ache, and we're not clear what the conditions were at home. But it does seem like she was, and social media only tells part of the story, but this loving mom. Her boyfriend, though, had run-ins with the law, reportedly was wearing an ankle monitor, is facing stalking allegations in another case. How could that factor into how she's prosecuted, knowing that she allegedly left this 3-year-old, though she was dating the guy, in the care of someone who I think on the outset we could look at and say was potentially dangerous?
And Chris, that's absolutely right. Obviously, he's wearing an ankle monitor. There's arrest for larceny, restraint. There's a stalking indictment. So this is someone that has had run-ins with the law, and I think that's absolutely a factor both prosecutors and a jury might consider. You're going to leave your 3-year-old baby with a criminal. But I think more than Alexander's criminal history are really the injuries to Dawson. And I'm sure we're going to talk about that. This wasn't just one injury, right? There's injuries all over his body. There's dated injuries. I think that's going to show the knowledge and the neglect that, listen, you have allowed your child to be in the presence of someone who is abusing him. It's either that or you were abusing him yourself. So I think there's going to be a lot of finger pointing in this case, but at a minimum, it seems like we're going to be dealing with neglect. And that duty's there. I have no duty, you have no duty to help baby Dawson, but she does as the mother.
And reportedly, it seems just from what Dawson's dad has been saying is that she was the one who had custody of Dawson at the time that all of this happened. How, and clearly she has that duty as the mom in custody, but how do custody issues factor into how these cases play out? Because Christopher Alexander was her boyfriend, but that's not an official, he was not the legal guardian, it seems, of baby Dawson at the time. How do those custody situations factor into child abuse cases like this?
Well, Chris, custody is very important because who has access to the child? And there's two types of custody. There's legal custody and there's physical custody. Legal custody is who can make decisions for the child, and oftentimes, both parents, even if they're separated, will have legal custody. But oftentimes, especially when you're dealing with a child or someone who's in school, one parent will have primary physical custody. And that's important because obviously where Dawson was when these injuries happened is going to be critical evidence in this case. If he was in the custody of biological mom, Berg, and her boyfriend, Alexander, well, they're the only ones who had access to the child. It's not like, he was going to daycare. It seems like he was in their home. And if these injuries happened in the home, the only logical and reasonable assumption is that they happened on their watch.
There's still so much we don't know in this case, and of course everything's alleged. I do want to read, this was from Fox 4, was the first station, it appears, to get the court documents in this case out of McKinney, Texas. But the injuries that Dawson allegedly has include bleeding in the brain, bruising, and this is the one that I wanted to touch on, bruising in various states of healing. When it comes to her defense potentially, which apparently in the court documents at the hospital, she says he did not have these injuries when I left the house in the case of that. I could see a medical examiner or let's say doctors, not at the point yet where a medical examiner might be involved, but you're looking at bruising that is in various states of healing. What does that tell you?
It tells me a lot. And look, accidents happen. Our firm is in trial right now in a very serious case where a child suffered a fracture. And of course, the defense is that, look, kids get hurt and accidents happen. But in a case like this, Chris, when you have multiple injuries over a period of time, that's not an accident. That's abuse. So that's going to be very, very strong evidence. Look, I expect Alexander to argue that baby Dawson fell and this was just a one-time incident and it couldn't have been avoided, or even if it could have been, it doesn't rise to the level of recklessness or criminal negligence, right? And certainly not intentional. At least that's going to be the defense argument. But if you have bruises, other parts of the body, bruises over different time periods, that accident argument goes out the door. So it's going to be very hard to defend this case if that is indeed true.
At the same time, kind of going back to the custody part of it, if he has bruising over various states of his body and he doesn't have any legal custody, he's kind of just an individual in the home, and there's no, witnesses, if Berg allegedly didn't see him beat the child in the past, if there's no video, like a Ring doorbell camera or something that would prove that, how can you tie those injuries to potentially him, knowing that he has, this boy didn't magically get bruises all over his body, and you have a criminal in the home who's now accused of something on this particular day, but if there is a history of it, how do you go about trying to tie that to the suspect in this case?
Well, that's why we're going to see that finger pointing, right? That's typical in these types of cases. I'm guessing that Dawson lived in the home with his mother and the mother's boyfriend. Now, obviously, if there's other people that had access to the child, that will sort of widen the possible suspects. But if it's really just the two of them because of his young age, the assumption is that one of them was the abuser and the other one turned a blind eye or allowed it to happen. I'm sure the defense will come up with something like defense attorneys do, but the former prosecutor in me believes that this is a very strong case, again, assuming that no one else had access to the child. There's multiple injuries over multiple periods of time. Seems like a strong case for first-degree abuse under Texas law.
And then, you just at the time of this recording, it's been reported by the family in statements to local media and then online that Dawson is just in a very, very difficult state in the hospital, and the dad told a local TV station he's in this place where you're trying to make these impossible decisions that no one would ever want to about, I guess, care going forward. The attorney for Berg said that her bond conditions were changed so she could, quote, say goodbye. If the husband has custody of the children, who makes the decisions about potentially, and I hate saying it this way, but end-of-life care when it comes to a serious brain injury like it appears that Dawson has at this point? But then you have Berg, who's the mom. What type of power could she have in this situation if she doesn't have custody in terms of how this plays out?
Even if Berg, the mother, has lost the physical custody, unless she's lost legal custody, her parental rights were terminated, she still has the right to make decisions for the child. And she's charged with neglect, not the actual abuse. And she's out on bond, and apparently, or she likely will be able to say goodbye. Obviously, it's every parent's worst nightmare to have to bury their child, and in this particular case, make the decision to take the child off life support because of Dawson's brain injury. So I can't imagine what the family is going through right now. But the biological father and the mother would have to make that decision unless the mother's rights were terminated. And that's a separate proceeding. It's not a criminal proceeding. It's in California we call it dependency. Each state's a little bit different, but when social workers and child protective services get involved, you can actually terminate those parental rights. And if you do, it's like you never had the child.
And if this does end up being a case where you have Alexander versus Berg, if Berg says Alexander was the abuser in the home, and Alexander maybe says I wasn't home for any of these incidents, and you don't have proof that any of them happened, we don't know how this is going to play out. How does that work with who could go on trial first? How those allegations could factor in against one person? If the first person's convicted, how does that factor into how the second person comes in potentially as a witness in a case and pushes back on however this plays out?
So it can go a couple of directions. You can cut a deal with the mom as the neglecting parent, right? Because she wasn't participating in the affirmative acts of abuse. I'm not saying that that's justified by any stretch, but that's one possibility where you have a less culpable defendant testifying against a more culpable one. He may ultimately, Alexander, be charged with murder, assuming, Dawson passes. I mean, even under Texas law, this is a potential life case or a 5-year, 99-year case, depending on the extent of the abuse. Or you can say, you know what, if you're the prosecution, I'm just going to try both of them. Try to try both of them together. Now expect the defense to file a severance motion. The last thing you want, especially if you're the mother Berg, is to be tried with the more culpable defendant, who's Alexander. So the defense will argue that it's prejudicial to try them both together. The prosecution will say that it's more efficient, same facts, same witnesses, same evidence, but oftentimes judges will grant those severance motions when the defense raises them, because it's much easier to defend the case when you can point to an empty chair.
And as far as Alexander's defense, he has a criminal record that's been talked about. He was indicted on stalking charges. Can that past potentially be used against him in a trial? Because at the same time, you could look and say, this was if he argues this was an isolated incident, who I was in the past is not who I am today. Because clearly, I mean, when you read this story and then you start seeing his criminal past, like you look at him in a light of like, this is a bad guy who was in the home with this child.
So if he's a convicted felon and he testifies, the fact that he has a felony can be brought in, not necessarily the underlying crime or the facts of that crime, just the fact that he's a felon, he can be asked about that. I don't expect Alexander to testify in a case like this. He'll get torn to shreds on cross-examination. So normally the criminal history isn't relevant if the defendant doesn't testify unless it shows some sort of pattern, right? We call it 404B evidence. In states a little bit different. That's under federal law. California state has an evidence code that says, listen, prior bad acts can come in if they show a pattern of, in this case, would be child abuse. Now, I'm not sure any of his prior charges and convictions have anything to do with child abuse or, frankly, even crimes of violence, although there's threats of violence. So expect the defense to argue in a motion to eliminate that should be kept out, and a judge would probably grant that motion as more prejudicial than probative in a case like this.
He tells this story, according to the court documents, that he heard a thud, and that's when he found the boy, rushes him to the hospital, but then he gets to the hospital and he reportedly lawyers up, doesn't give a lot of information, doesn't want to speak to police anymore. Everyone, of course, has a right to an attorney. Everyone, of course, has a right to a defense, but can that be used against him, that this was a guy who was not cooperative in this situation when doctors are obviously looking and trying to figure out what happened, potentially to save this boy's life if they have all of that information?
So certainly the thud statement can come in. Now, generally speaking, exercising your right to remain silent cannot be used against you at trial. That would be reversible error. So it's a question of, did he exercise his right to remain silent to police officers? If so, absolutely, that is not coming in. But, if he was talking to medical personnel that weren't police officers and it wasn't that type of interrogation, that potentially could come in. Again, if it's not a law enforcement type interview, but just what he said to doctors.
And then Texas is a death penalty state, and this is not a death penalty eligible case yet. Dawson is still alive, as far as the last time we've been keeping an eye on this story, but his dad, it seems, concerned that Dawson may not survive this. So if this does become a murder case, what type of evidence would need to happen for this to be a death penalty, a capital case in the state of Texas?
So in a state like Texas, to pursue the death penalty, the aggravating factors have to outweigh the mitigating ones. Can't think of many mitigating factors in this case, Chris. You have severe physical abuse of a child, probably even before he was 3 years old. Oftentimes this abuse happens continuously, and I see no reason to abuse any child, but much less a 3-year-old child. I mean, I can't fathom any legal or moral justification for doing this. So the aggravating factors are certainly significant. This poor child seems to have been tortured to the point that he's now brain dead and is likely going to have to be taken off child support. So if you believe in the death penalty, this seems to be a death penalty type of case.
And obviously, we have a long way to go, and what is a very just sad case that is playing out in Texas. Nemo Romani, it's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for being with me on this one.
Thanks, Chris. Talk to you soon.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.